What if the most important conversation you will ever have is not with another person, but with the silence you've been running from? We exist in a culture of relentless broadcast, a world that rewards volume, visibility, and constant curation of a self for public consumption. You've been taught that to matter, you must be seen. To have value, you must articulate it, display it, perform it. But this outward projection comes at a hidden cost, a slow, quiet draining. The more you speak to be heard, the less you can hear yourself. The more validation you seek from the world's stage, the more you feel an anonymous emptiness in the wings. The psychologist Carl Jung observed that people do not lose their path from a lack of external maps, but from a refusal to turn and face their own interior landscape. When your life is lived as a performance for an imagined audience, you must wear a mask to play the part. And in time, the lines blur. You forget which gestures are the characters and which are your own. The costume becomes your skin. Therefore, silence is not a retreat. It is not passive. Silence is the courageous act of stepping off the stage. It is the moment you stop performing, stop explaining, and finally begin to listen to the whispers rising from the depths of your own unconscious mind. This year, 2026, may not be about raising your voice. It may be about finding the bravery to lower the noise, to turn your attention inward, to focus on yourself, confront yourself, and begin what Jung termed individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. If you feel a pull toward a more authentic, grounded existence, one that does not hunger for applause, stay with this. If you are ready to begin that turn, comment, "I am turning inward." What follows will not simplify your life. It will deepen it. And that is the foundation of an existence that is genuinely, undeniably yours. First, why does the approval of others feel like oxygen? There are fleeting sensations we often dismiss. A sharp pinch of irritation when you're overlooked. A hollow chill when your contribution meets silence. A vague ache of disappointment when your effort seems invisible. We label these as petty, as ego. But at the level of the psyche, they are not trivial. They are signals. As we move deeper into 2026, these signals can become more pronounced. Like a persistent alarm you can no longer ignore. They indicate that your sense of worth has been mortgaged to external judges. This insecurity does not stem from arrogance. It springs from a quiet, internal void, a space where you have not yet learned to stand firm on your own authority unless someone else grants you permission. Jung proposed that we are not born with this dependency. It is cultivated. It grows gradually, in the soil of a neglected inner world. When the connection to your own internal compass weakens, when you can no longer decipher its quiet signals, you are forced to turn outward. You ask the world to tell you who you are, what you're worth, where you belong. At that point, approval ceases to be mere social pleasantry. It transforms into psychological evidence, proof that you exist, that you are acceptable, that you have a right to occupy space. And when this evidence is withheld, a primal anxiety surfaces. In a transitional time like this new year, many feel this anxiety with fresh intensity. I recall a colleague. Outwardly, he was the archetype of engagement, charismatic, always contributing, the first to share an accomplishment or a thoughtful take. His digital presence was a curated gallery of a life in motion. But what was revealing was not his visibility. It was his reaction to invisibility. A post with few likes would plunge him into a fog of self-doubt. A meeting where his idea wasn't championed would leave him sullen for days. In a moment of rare honesty, he confessed, "If no one reacts, it's like I fade out. Like I'm not even here." From a Jungian lens, this wasn't a social media problem. It was a symptom. It revealed a man who had lost his inner anchor long ago. Jung held that when the ego is not rooted internally, it will desperately seek mooring in the external world. Every compliment, every nod, Every digital heart is a temporary stake you drive into the shifting sands of others' attention to hold your self-concept in place. But these stakes are inherently unstable. They depend on the weather of other people's moods, their capacity, their distraction. And when one is pulled loose, you don't just feel disappointed. You feel unmoored, as if a piece of your very reality has been erased. In our accelerated age, where attention is the most fractured currency, this destabilization happens with terrifying ease. Jung pointed to a difficult truth few wish to face. Loneliness does not originate from being physically alone. It arises from an inability to commune with what matters most within you. When you are disconnected from your own core, you talk more, you post more, you perform more, hoping someone will see you, name you, and thus confirm you exist. But this kind of recognition only skims the surface. It never reaches the root of the solitude. Picture yourself on a vast, dark ocean at night. If you can fix your eyes on a single, steady lighthouse beam, you can endure rough seas. You have orientation. But if there is no guiding light, you will clutch at any piece of debris floating by. A bit of wood, an empty barrel. In the psychological realm, others' approval is that debris. It may keep you afloat for a moment, but it will never carry you to shore. Jung believed a defining ailment of modern life is this very drift, navigating by the capricious winds of external reaction, rather than by an internal gyroscope. The peril is that the need for approval rarely announces itself as weakness. It often wears the respectable uniforms of ambition, drive, and disciplined self-improvement. But Jung emphasized the critical distinction lies in the inner motive. Do you act from a place of intrinsic value, or from a need to be seen acting? Externally, these can look identical. Psychologically, they are worlds apart. One flows from connection with self. The other springs from a fear of inner abandonment. You may not realize it, but each time you await a response, your mind is not truly reaching out. It is searching for a reflection of itself in the eyes of another. Each compliment becomes a temporary seal over an inner sense of lack. A seal that always, inevitably, breaks. The paradox Jung often revisited is this. The more fervently you seek external validation, the more profound your internal loneliness becomes. Because validation only addresses the persona, the mask you present. It never meets the actual person behind it. And when your deepest self remains unseen, you can be lonely in a crowded room, praised on a public stage, admired by thousands. This is why so many who are visibly successful carry a private, nameless emptiness. Understanding this is not about self-blame. It is about honest recognition. To see your need for approval not as a character flaw, but as a signpost. It points directly to where your inner foundation requires attention. Jung did not advocate for social withdrawal or deny the human need for connection, but he issued a clear warning. When approval becomes the primary fuel for your self-worth, you have handed the reins of your psychic life to others. The crucial insight is this. The craving for recognition is not the problem itself. It is the symptom. It reveals the absence of an inner anchor. When you are not steady within, you must borrow the eyes of others to feel solid. As you navigate 2026, the essential shift is not about becoming more visible. It is about becoming so inwardly steady that visibility becomes a choice, not a necessity. It is about beginning the quiet work of building authentic value from the inside out. That is where the real voyage begins. Second, the mask you wear is slowly becoming your face. Once you start to see the hunger for approval as a symptom of inner instability, a strange void can open. You may feel less preoccupied with external eyes, yet simultaneously adrift. If you are no longer playing that familiar role, who are you? At this crossroads, Jung introduces a pivotal concept, the persona, or the social mask. This is not about deceit. The persona is a necessary psychological function. It is the interface that allows you to operate in the social world. You cannot walk into your workplace or a family gathering expressing every raw impulse, every unfiltered emotion, every inner contradiction. You need a coherent role, a fitted identity. The psychological tragedy, Jung warned, begins not with wearing the mask, but when you forget you are wearing one, when the persona is no longer a tool you use, but an identity you have mistaken for your true self. He described it starkly. The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. The true danger is not that society misunderstands you. It is that you, too, have begun to believe the misunderstanding. You defend your title, your image, your role with more ferocity than you defend your own authentic feelings. Consider the mythic trickster, Loki, a shapeshifter of unparalleled skill, adapting his form to survive and manipulate every situation. Initially, this fluidity grants him power and influence. But with each transformation, something essential is eroded. He loses a stable shape. Eventually, he no longer knows his original form. That very adaptability, untethered from a core, leads him into chaos and self-destruction. Symbolically, Loki represents a psyche that has lived too long inside its adaptations, losing touch with its own center. Adaptation is necessary for social life. Loss of self is a psychological catastrophe. This is why so many people feel profoundly drained without obvious physical cause. The exhaustion is not from labor, but from maintenance, the constant energy required to uphold an image, to manage impressions, to keep the mask firmly in place. As the persona expands, the authentic self is relegated backstage. Feelings deemed unacceptable, thoughts that don't fit the role, desires that contradict the image, all are suppressed into the unconscious. They do not vanish. They gather force, waiting to manifest as a pervasive emptiness, unexplained irritability, a loss of direction, or the haunting sense of being a ghost in your own life. The subtle cruelty of the social mask is that society often rewards it. The person who is always appropriate, emotionally regulated, and professionally consistent is praised. But Jung argued that psychological maturity is not measured by how flawlessly you perform a role, but by how connected you remain to the living, breathing being beneath it. When the persona commands the entire stage, the real person doesn't disappear. They are simply forced into the shadows. And the longer they linger there, the more they will seek expression through disruptive, often unconscious, channels. To visualize this, imagine the persona as the exterior paint and siding of a house. At first, this exterior makes the house presentable, blending it into the neighborhood. But if you become obsessed with repainting the siding while the internal framework is rotting, the structure will ultimately fail. Many today invest their best energy in the paint, the image, the title, the social proof. Meanwhile, the inner foundation, the core values, the genuine emotions, the true passions, is neglected. Jung believed this imbalance is the source of modern exhaustion, not from doing too much, but from living too far from one's essence. As we move through 2026, a world increasingly optimized for performance and personal branding, the risk of fusing with our persona grows exponentially. You can be perfectly right, impeccably fine, and utterly appropriate, while inside, you feel like a stranger to yourself. Jung's prescription was not to destroy the mask in a dramatic rebellion. It was awareness. The conscious knowledge, this is a role I am playing. It is not my totality. This reclamation begins in small, private acts. It's the moment you notice yourself saying something solely to preserve an image, and you choose silence instead. It's admitting to yourself, in private, that you are weary, even if your exterior remains composed. It's refusing to let a job title or social role define your entire identity. Each of these moments, Jung taught, is a quiet revolution, a step toward reclaiming sovereignty over your inner life. This stage does not demand you change your external life overnight. It simply invites you to look, with clear eyes, at the mask you've worn, to see what roles you play, why you play them, and what quiet tax your soul is paying for the performance. When you begin to see the persona as exterior paint, not structural foundation, you create the possibility of returning inside to rebuild. And only with this awareness can you journey to what Jung called the return to yourself. Before we go deeper, take a breath. If you have ever felt that you are executing a role perfectly, yet not truly living, share in the comments one identity you feel you've carried for too long. Naming it is not an admission of failure. It is often the first, brave sign of readiness to move forward. Third, you fear silence because it introduces you to yourself. If you've begun to recognize the social mask you wear, the next sensation is often not relief, but unease. When you stop the constant performance, when you cease reacting to every external cue, you are confronted with the space behind the role. And that space leads to a fear we rarely name aloud, the fear of true silence. Silence is frightening not because it is empty, but because it is overwhelmingly full. When the familiar noise of distraction fades, when there's no schedule to hide within, nothing to consume your attention, that which has been suppressed begins to surface. It might be a deep fatigue you've been pacifying with "I'm fine." It could be the dissonance of living a life that looks right but feels alien. It may be a formless sadness, not acute enough to name a crisis, but persistent enough to stain your peace. Silence does not create these feelings. It removes the insulation, so you can no longer avoid them. Consider this. Silence is like turning off the podcast, the music, the audiobook during a long, solitary drive at night. With the audio on, the road, your thoughts, your own presence are secondary. But when you switch it off, the world rushes in. The sound of the engine, the rhythm of the tires, the cadence of your own breath, even a latent anxiety you'd been drowning out. The road hasn't changed, but your experience of traveling it has become undeniably, unforgettably present. For many, psychological silence is that moment of turning off the noise. It doesn't make the journey harder. It makes you more aware that you are on one. From Jung's perspective, this is not a pathology to cure. It is a necessary phase of integration. Modern people do not suffer from a lack of information or activity. We suffer from atrophied capacity to abide with our own inner reality. When you are accustomed to living outwardly, your inner world becomes foreign territory, and we fear what is foreign. Silence, then, is like returning to a childhood home you abandoned long ago. The rooms are familiar, yet strange. You must relearn its echoes. Jung offered a famous, piercing insight. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Silence is the precondition for that consciousness. It is the dark room where the undeveloped images of yourself can emerge. Not darkness as evil, but as the totality of aspects you have not yet acknowledged, accepted, or integrated. What makes silence terrifying is its refusal to collaborate in your escape. With nothing to busy you, you start to notice the inner contradictions you've been smoothing over. You may be highly competent in your role, socially adept, yet feel profoundly disconnected from the life you are leading. This, Jung explained, is where the split between the social persona and the inner self is laid bare. And silence is the arena where that split can no longer be ignored. We often mistake conscious silence for isolation or depression. Jung drew a vital distinction. Avoidance is cutting off the world from fear. Conscious silence is remaining fully engaged with life, working, connecting, contributing, but ceasing to use noise as a fugitive's tool to run from yourself. This is not withdrawal. It is an active, courageous choice. It demands more fortitude than most public achievements. Here lies the paradox. The more you avoid silence, the more power it holds over you as a specter of dread. The more you dare to sit within it, the more its terror transmutes. Not because you grow numb, but because you begin to understand what it has been trying to show you all along. Jung saw this fear not as an enemy to vanquish, but as a messenger, an invitation. That invitation states, something within you is asking to be seen, to be named, to be brought into the light of your awareness. Only by descending into this awareness do ordinary experiences take on new meaning. A viewer once shared that he realized he wasn't addicted to his phone, he was addicted to avoiding aloneness. Any empty moment was instantly filled with digital input. Then, during a power outage, he was forced to sit in a quiet room. First came restlessness, then irritation, then a long-buried feeling surfaced. The conviction that he was living a life that wasn't his own. He said the moment was painful, but it was so viscerally real that he could never fully return to his old distracted patterns. From a Jungian view, that is not a breakdown. It is the dawn of consciousness. When silence exposes you, it does not diminish you. It strips away the comforting illusion that everything is fine, simply because you are perpetually in motion. Many are exhausted not from overwork, but from never permitting a pause long enough to listen. In practice, silence need not begin with grand gestures. It starts in the minute spaces. It's allowing a gap in conversation to remain unfilled. It's letting an uncomfortable emotion simply exist, without rushing to fix or feed it. It's 5 minutes of doing nothing but noticing the sensations in your body, the flow of your thoughts, without judgment. The duration is less important than the attitude. You are not using silence to become a better person. You are using it to become a more real person. When you practice this, you will discover something profound. What unsettles you is not the silence itself. It is the parts of yourself you have never dared to encounter. And as you stand in 2026, silence ceases to be a lifestyle trend about slowing down. It becomes a non-negotiable psychological space. The only space where you can see what is truly operating beneath the surface narrative of your life. Because once silence has introduced you to yourself, the journey does not end in calm. It leads to a deeper, more potent encounter. An encounter with the shadow, the part you've learned to disown, yet which secretly directs your steps. Fourth, the disowned part of you is secretly in command. Once silence has pulled back the curtain, and you can no longer use busyness or distraction as a refuge, a deeper stratum of your psyche begins to stir. Not with drama, but with a steady, undeniable pressure. This is when you may start to sense that there has always been another presence within you. Observing, influencing. In crucial moments, quietly steering your decisions, your reactions, the very course of your life. Jung named this presence the shadow. In Jung's framework, the shadow is not merely your dark side in a moralistic sense. It is the sum total of everything you have had to deny, repress, or hide in order to be loved, accepted, and seen as good. It contains the anger you swallowed to remain agreeable, the vulnerability you buried to appear strong, the raw need for recognition you disavowed beneath a facade of humility. Paradoxically, the shadow can also hold powerful, creative, and vital energies you dared not claim. Your boldness, your artistic fury, your unconventional wisdom, because you feared standing out, feared exile from the tribe. Consider through a Jungian lens a figure known for immense achievement, a visionary founder, or a legendary athlete. Their legendary drive and uncompromising will to win are celebrated. Yet, those close to them often describe a collateral cost, a relentless inner pressure, a terror of mediocrity, a loneliness at the peak. This can be understood as the shadow at work, an unconscious identification with performance, where self-worth becomes conditional on perpetual triumph. When such potent forces remain unconscious, they can fuel extraordinary external success while creating an internal desert. Jung did not condemn drive or ambition. He warned that when you do not recognize the unconscious motives behind even your most praised qualities, they begin to use you. The shadow rarely appears as a cartoon villain. It more often dresses in the respectable clothes of discipline, perfectionism, high standards, and relentless improvement. And because society applauds these garments, the shadow becomes harder to see, easier to justify, and more effective at governing your life from the hidden control room of the unconscious. From this, Jung derived one of his most pivotal statements: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Many believe they are authors of their own story, while in reality, they are being narrated by inner scripts written long ago, by parts of themselves they've never met. Modern cognitive science echoes this in a different language. Research consistently shows that a vast proportion of human decision-making occurs unconsciously, guided by neural pathways forged from past experiences, emotional memories, and core beliefs. When you are unaware of these patterns, you experience the illusion of choice, while often reenacting old programs. What Jung termed the shadow, science might call implicit cognitive and emotional schemas. To visualize, imagine your psyche as a ship. You are on the deck, conscious of the wind, the sails, the horizon. You believe you are steering. But beneath the waterline, unseen, is the rudder, the shadow. If you do not know its setting, the ship will follow a course determined by this hidden mechanism. Many live entire lives this way, making what feel like deliberate choices, all the while being guided by forces they never perceive. The hardest part of facing the shadow is not intellectual. It is emotional honesty. You may not want to admit the depth of your envy. You may resist seeing how much you crave external validation. You might refuse to acknowledge your fear of being ordinary, of being left behind, of not being enough. But Jung's central rule is this: what you deny within yourself does not cease to exist. You merely grant it autonomous power in the dark. From there, it expresses itself indirectly, through sudden irritability, through self-sabotaging patterns, through choices that leave you wondering, why do I keep ending up here? The Jungian path is not to battle the shadow into submission. It is to integrate it. Integration does not mean acting out every repressed impulse. It means bringing these disowned parts into the light of awareness, so you can relate to them consciously. When you recognize your deep-seated competitiveness, you can channel it intentionally rather than being enslaved by it. When you acknowledge your fear of failure, it no longer has the power to veto your risks from the shadows. When you own your need for recognition, you cease making unconscious trades of your integrity for applause. The core lesson here is a sobering truth. The most powerful influences on your life are rarely out there. They are the internal forces you have refused to acknowledge. A denied shadow does not vanish. It operates from the unconscious, shaping your reactions and your direction with invisible hands. For Jung, the moment of shadow recognition is a quantum leap in consciousness. You are no longer a passenger in a fog. You gain a critical distance from your own inner compulsions. From that distance, genuine choice becomes possible for the first time, replacing the repetitive reactions you once called personality or destiny. Therefore, if you wish to move through 2026 with more authenticity and focus, the essential task is not to control life more tightly. It is to stop denying the full spectrum of who you are. And before we move to the culmination, take a quiet moment now. Let your breath settle. Allow what has resonated to find its place within you. Because in this kind of pause, real integration can begin. Fifth, in 2026, turn inward. Build from silence. Having glimpsed the mask, dared the silence, and met the shadow, this journey arrives at its natural resolution. Not with a fanfare, but with a clear, quiet settling. Here, Jung's question shifts from the theoretical to the profoundly practical in 2026. How will you live? The answer is deceptively simple. Turn inward. Build from silence. For Jung, turning inward is not a self-help platitude or narcissistic introspection. It is the essential act of reclaiming the psychic energy that has been scattered outward. When you live for approval, your energy is siphoned into monitoring others' perceptions. When you are fused with your persona, energy is consumed in image maintenance. When the shadow rules unseen, energy is drained by unconscious internal conflicts. A life structured this way, however impressive its exterior, is a life of perpetual energy leakage. Silence emerges as that leakage is repaired. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of wholeness. It is the quiet of someone who no longer needs to explain, defend, or perform their existence. You don't need to speak constantly to feel present. You don't need to react immediately to prove your understanding. You don't need to be everywhere to know that you are. Jung captured this with his famed dictum: who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. A life fixated on the external is a form of dreaming. Turning the gaze inward is the act of awakening. You see this spirit in everyday archetypes. It might be the person who was once always on, always sharing, always in the comment fray. Then, gradually, they speak less. They no longer feel compelled to justify their choices or respond to every opinion. Not from apathy, but from a newfound internal solidity. Interestingly, they do not become less significant. Their words carry more weight. Their presence is felt not because of its frequency, but because of its depth. From Jung's view, this signals the establishment of an inner axis. Turning inward, in the Jungian sense, does not isolate you from the world. It grounds you within it. When you are no longer jerked around by the rhythms of comparison and reaction, you begin to sense your own true tempo. You know when to move and when to rest. You no longer feel compelled to chase every opportunity out of a fear of being left behind. Jung believed that only when you cease living through comparison do you gain the authentic capacity to choose. Visualize your consciousness as a camera. If you are constantly panning, zooming, chasing every external movement, the footage is shaky, blurred, superficial. Building from silence is like mounting the camera on a steady tripod. You choose your frame. You focus. You wait for the right light. Not every shot will be perfect, but only from this stable, intentional position can you capture anything of clarity and depth. Jung observed that many live entire lives without ever finding the tripod. They travel the world but never develop a clear picture of themselves. To live from silence is not to abandon ambition or cease creating. It is to cease allowing ambition to define your worth. You work because the work has meaning, not because it will be seen. You build quietly, without needing to announce each milestone. Jung saw this as the expression of an ego in its rightful place, not inflated to mask emptiness, not deflated from fear, but centered and strong enough that it does not need to shout. A common fear arises. If I live this way, will I become passive? Will I be forgotten? Jung would see this fear itself as the ghost of the old, externally referenced life. He emphasized that psychological development is not measured by speed or noise, but by inner coherence. When you are no longer pulled in a dozen directions, each step, even if slower, carries the full weight of your being. Your path becomes integrous. Placed in the context of 2026, this approach takes on urgent relevance, not because the year is magically significant, but because you stand at a personal threshold, continue on the momentum of old externalized patterns, or begin to live with more intention. To be less reactive, yet more profound, less visible, yet more truthful. Jung did not promise this path would make you more famous or admired. He promised it would prevent you from losing yourself in the process of living. At its heart, turning inward and building from silence is not a final achievement. It is the foundational practice of an authentic life. From this foundation, relationships become more genuine, work gains purpose, and choices cease to be born of fear or lack. You need not flee to a mountaintop to practice this. You only need to change your point of focus within your existing life. The practice is disarmingly simple. Carve a slice of intentional silence for yourself each day. A space with no goal of productivity or self-improvement. In it, you do not need to become anyone. Speak less in situations where you used to speak solely to be perceived. Gently gather your energy and invest it in what you feel is right and true, especially, if no one is watching. If you sustain this practice, your center of gravity will shift of its own accord. And as you move through 2026, you will no longer be frantically searching for the answer to how you should live. You will feel it, quietly, unshakably. As we reach the final moments, you may not feel a surge of motivation. You might feel a deep, settling calm. For Jung, this is not emptiness. It is the rare and precious experience of no longer being pulled outward, of touching the quiet center of your own being once more. The new year does not require you to become a different person. It invites you to become more deeply who you always were. Speak less, but be clearer. React less, but be steadier. When you cease the constant performance of proving you exist, life itself becomes lighter, cleaner, ordered from within. Jung's ultimate insight was that true maturation comes not from conquering the external world, but from a faithful, ongoing reunion with yourself. And perhaps the most potent act available to you in 2026 is not a loud resolution, but the courage to be silent long enough to hear what is genuinely alive within you. Thank you for sharing this time and this deep reflection. If this journey provided value, a moment of clarity or peace, please press like, a quiet gesture of shared understanding. If you wish to continue exploring the landscape of the psyche through a Jungian lens, subscribe to the channel